Hello everyone, my name is Govind Gopakumar. I teach at Concordia University at the Center for Engineering and Society, and I will be talking today about global engineering issues. Now this lecture is going to be very brief because you already have the slides. I'm just going to be talking very quickly about different aspects, different issues that I think have great relevance to understanding concepts and skills associated with global engineering. And so we're going to talk about engineering for justice, about globalization, about sustainability, and about innovation and entrepreneurship. So first, engineering for justice. Now, why is this important? It's considered important primarily because the engineering profession as a whole has tended to favor, in several contexts, and not just in Canada, but in other places also, had tended to favor the political status quo. Now, what I mean by that is that it has largely been unsympathetic or disengaged from questions of justice, questions of inequality, and questions of who gets what in society. And there are several reasons for this, and I have listed those reasons in the slide, so I'm not going to go into great detail about it, but it's got to do with the nature of the profession. It's got to do with how the profession has come to be constituted in society to provide a certain kind of standing that engineers have in society. Now, the different kinds of justice that we can talk about, mostly many of the definitions of justice have to do with procedural questions or corrective questions. And these are the ones that we commonly hear of in the news and in the media. But there are also other forms of justice which we want to talk about more with regards to the engineering profession, which is questions of social justice, which is about redistributing for the existing forms of inequality in society. And so how do you redistribute? You try to address structural social inequalities like questions of gender, questions of how is it that visible minorities and other forms, other racial or ethnic minorities are treated in societies, and how do you correct for those through actions in different sectors of society, including in professions. And that's where the question of engineering for justice is associated with a form of set of actions and set of practices that try to rectify historical wrongs and historical structural inequalities present in society. So in doing that, concepts of justice as fairness, as well as social justice as redistributing the kinds of capabilities that are available for different individuals in society, are all part of this the notion of social justice. The second issue that we'll talk about in more detail in a separate lecture is the question of globalization. Now, what is meant by globalization? Globalization is an understanding of the different and evolving forms of human contact that are present in our contemporary society. Now, what do we mean by forms of human contact? It addresses the forms of interactions and social relations that social, economic, and political relations, actually, that are present in our contemporary society. Now, globalization has its basis in several kinds of innovations that are present in our contemporary society. The primary one is the changing forms of economic processes that have allowed for greater forms of trade and international exchange and commerce. A second aspect is the creation of new technological and managerial processes that actually facilitate these different forms of interaction. And also a third aspect is new forms of sociocultural integration and differentiation that are present in our societies. And so when we think about globalization, it's a very complex process that has social, cultural, economic, political, and technological managerial manifestations. So when we think about globalization, the global economy is a key aspect. Now, when you think about the global economy, you think of the economy that is primarily internationalized. But I think there are different aspects to the global economy also. Some of them are very localized and some of them are very internationalized. And there are many other forms of global economy that actually have combinations of both local and global. And so some form of a hybrid economy where you have both localized globalism, which is global economic connections that remain anchored within particular local contexts. And a good example of that are financial centers. Now, global financial centers are not present everywhere in the globe. There are a few places, like, for example, London, New York, and Tokyo, which are alpha global financial hubs in this world. Not every place can aspire to be a London or a New York because of several regional, local, global contexts that have come together in these cities to actually transform them into these massive financial hubs. You also have globalized localism, which is local economic interactions that are spreading globally. And so things like eat local food movements or produce local food movements have become increasingly very popular as a response to the global economy. And so these forms of local economic and social interactions have become globalized, are present in different parts of the world in different forms, but nevertheless they have a global kind of reach. Sustainability. Now, this is something that has acquired a lot of importance as a result of the development of this notion of sustainable development that has become so popular in contemporary times. Now, when you think about sustainability, it talks about the relations between society, economy, and environment. And we can think of these three relations in three different forms: as life support mechanisms that are the interrelation between environment and society, as livelihood production, which is the relation between society and economy, and economic throughput, which is the relation between economy and environment. Now, when we talk about sustainable development, we are talking about balancing and balancing the interactions between these three different forms of relations, balancing life support, livelihood, and economic throughput. Now, in thinking about these sustainability relations in our planet, it's also important to bear in mind the history of sustainable development. Sustainable development can be traced back to the definition that is contained in a very important document called the Our Common Future, proposed by the World Commission on Environment and Development back in 1987. And what it proposes is that, and this definition is very important because it's repeated over and over and over again in understanding sustainable development. And it says, humanity has the ability to make sustainable development sustainable, to ensure that the needs of the present are met without compromising the needs of future generations to meet their own needs. Now, in thinking about the kinds of technological developments that are needed for sustainable relations, and I'm going to speak very briefly about this because I'll speak more about it in a later lecture. We need to think of technological solutions for life support. We need technological solutions for livelihood production and technological solutions for economic throughput. And balancing these different technological developmental directions is what is crucial to attaining sustainable development. Finally, social innovation and the associated aspects of entrepreneurship. When you think of social innovation, it's important to think of where is it that innovation is actually generated in. So there are both mainstream and alternative pathways. The mainstream pathways of innovation are the ones that we commonly encounter, associated with both public and university-based research as well as corporate research. Alternative pathways to innovation, on the other hand, are much more small scale and are more concerned with social and environmental value generation. So mainstream pathways, as I mentioned, are associated with university settings. They're publicly funded research, funded predominantly by both the federal and provincial government. And they're also fundamental research, commonly dominated by fundamental research agendas which have no immediate social relevance. On the other hand, corporate research and development is much more market-oriented research, which talks about scaling up so that you create a societal level demand and supply kind of context for new technological innovations, new gadgets, new devices that are constantly being inserted and developed for the market. Now, in this context of mainstream pathways, one very common understanding of the kinds of interrelations between these mainstream pathways has been called the triple helix research innovation process, which is a kind of collaborative model where governments, university, and industry, the three components of the triple helix, together collaborate and are involved in the process of research and development. And through this process of collaboration, you can create research synergies. And many of these are examples of these are present in universities, in the kinds of incubators, kind of research joint ventures that bring together research funding agencies, universities, and industrial partners in trying to create a synergistic environment where innovation can happen, which are not just funded by public sources, but are also appropriate for corporate actors. So in the context of all this mainstream efforts to innovate, there still remains the need for alternative pathways. And why is that? Because much of these mainstream agendas are in some ways captured by the interests that they promote. So for example, bureaucratic and political interests predominate in the research agenda. Similarly, there are also market imperfections in promoting social and environmental values, primarily because they're dominated by the need to satisfy the bottom line of corporations. And so in the process, much innovation remains undone, especially innovations that have a strong social and environmental value dimension. And that is where alternative pathways come in. There are different forms of alternative pathways, and I've listed some of this. We'll talk more in detail in another lecture. But in order to create these kinds of alternative pathways, you also need to create an enabling environment for this. You need to create a much more of an open business environment where it is not just the bottom line alone that needs to be satisfied. And so increasingly we're talking about the triple bottom line. And this is a good step in that direction. But you also need political will to support different forms of entrepreneurship and innovation in society. And so some have talked about creating something like an innovation engine. And you create an innovation engine that creates a pipeline for a diverse group of potential inventors and innovators. And then you create different forms of pathways to scale so that these innovations can actually become big in society and become not just major agents of social change, but also transform how is it that we interact with society, environment, and economy. And so they talk about a global innovation engine as well as new kinds of pathways to scale. So in conclusion, what we can say in the context of global engineering issues is that engineering practice is in a dynamic social, political, and economic setting. And in that context, it's important to understand the kinds of pressures that globalization, sustainability and sustainable development, and concepts of social justice and social innovation bring to actually trying to transform the nature of engineering practice in more social and environmentally beneficial directions. Thank you.